Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Darcy Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, May 10th, and we will be hearing the presentation, Cultural Districts and Cultural Institutions, Suns or Black Holes? For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number. And for your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box on your webinar toolbar, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2019. So thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. If you're looking down the list and you don't see your chapter or your division listed, we ask that you reach out to them and suggest that they join us. Today's session in particular is sponsored by the Urban Design and Preservation Division of APA. So thanks to them for sponsoring. And next up on your, there it is, on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. We are starting to fill in August, so you'll be seeing those pop up shortly. And you can register for all of our webcasts by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. To log your CM credits for attending today's session, just head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and then you can search for CM activities, either the event number or the title of today's webcast, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. This session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education. We have one for ethics and one for law, each worth 1.5 credits. And those are available, like I said, on demand through December 31st of this year. So you can check those out if you need those credits or if you're interested in the topics, again, by visiting our webcast webpage. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. Finally, we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just head over there to YouTube and search Planning Webcast. We'll pop up along with our over 200 webcasts that are available for viewing. We'll also have a PDF copy of the presentation available for download at the conclusion of today's session on ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Rifkin of the Urban Design and Preservation Division, who's going to do a quick intro on the division and get us started. Margaret.
Hi there. This is Margaret. Welcome. First, I wanted to say we are delighted to be in partnership with the National Consortium for Creative Placemaking to bring you a series of webinars on creative placemaking. Specifically, we have not only today's webinar, but we have another one coming up on July 19th, which is called about incorporating art in urban and site design. And then we have one on September 6th, again with Leo, on creative placemaking and the law. So stand by for that for your law credits. And wanted to alert you to the fact that we have this wonderful document available for you online. It features stories and photographs that were submitted for the writing competition we held, again with our partners at the consortium, and encourage you to take a look. You can find it online by simply Googling creative placemaking and then writing competition. That's the easiest way to get to it. That being said, we want to certainly encourage you all to make sure you're members of our division. And now I'd like to introduce Leo Vasquez, who is the Executive Director of the National Consortium for Creative Placemaking. And you all have probably already read his bio before signing up. I simply wanted to mention that, highlight the fact that Leo received one of the highest awards given in the urban planning field on issues of social equity, which was the 2012 APA National Leadership Award for advancing diversity and social justice in honor of Paul Davidoff. So we are particularly pleased to have him. Also, he's squeezing this into his very busy schedule, providing workshops and summits across the country on creative placemaking. With that, once again, I'm delighted to introduce Leo.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Chris. It's great to join all of you today. You should be at this point seeing my screen, and I'm going to do the Control L. Is that correct? Chris, Margaret, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yep,
Yes?
you look great.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. So if you didn't see my bio, you know, I've been primarily a community economic development planner for over 20 years now, and what's not in my bio is that I spent 2 years in planning school at USC, learning how planners can make communities better, and I spent the last 20 years observing how planners too often don't. And I wonder, and I always wonder why. You know, we're good people, we have great ideas, and what happened was in the first decade of my career, I did all the things that, you know, a lot of the things that you know, so many of us planners do, is, you know, the retail development, housing, economic development. Now, I've never been a transportation planner or an urban designer, but, you know, of course, there's always some of it in all that practice. And what I found is that the you know, those working on parks and housing, big projects were great, but it took so long to make things happen. And I often wonder why it took so long with people as well. And that's where about a decade ago, I was introduced to the idea of arts as a vehicle for community economic development. And first I thought, well, is this just city beautiful warmed over? And it's not. It really is creative placemaking really is something different, and I'll talk about it shortly. But I just want to let you know that what we're talking about is not just about doing projects. It's not just about whether districts and institutions are good or bad, and the answer is they're a little bit of both. Spoiler alert, sorry folks. But it's really about how we do our practice. And so before I get into it, I just want to do a little bit of announcements here. If you like to join us in Atlantic City, May 29th, I'm going to be doing a workshop on financing creative placemaking, and we have Arts Tank, which is kind of like Shark Tank for creative placemaking. And you know, with all the casinos that closed down, there's plenty of affordable hotel space there now in Atlantic City. So please join us there. We also do our work at NCCP is about building the field of creative placemaking. And so one of the ways we do that is, besides the presentations like this, is a series of workshops. And so we're doing a workshop on crowd mapping and creative site design. And both of those are really well suited for urban designers. We're doing one in Morristown, New Jersey, which is about 45 minutes northwest of New York City. And the other one's going to be at Temple University of Philadelphia, and they're both going to be in June. We haven't picked the date yet for Philadelphia project. Now, those of you who are in the West Coast or can fly out to LA, please join us June 20th to 22nd for Shifting Tides, our 2019 Pacific Creative Placemaking Leadership Summit. That's the leadership summits. If you haven't been to them, that's where we bring together planners, artists, arts administrators, elected officials, civic and cultural leaders to explore different issues in creative placemaking. Now, you might say, hey, you know, I was in San Francisco just a couple of months ago, and, you know, why should I go to another conference? And the reason is, look, APA, I do national, I do the state chapters as well. But But what's different about the summits is that it's very diverse in terms of the people who are there. So it's great to be among our, it's great to be among family, but sometimes it helps to also be with other people who are doing this work. So you want to learn anything more about this sessions or anything else? Go to cpcommunities.org. Sorry, that's one of my announcements. Now, I said that creative placemaking is not just a buzzword. It's not city beautiful or civic art just warmed over. And why do I say that? City beautiful civic art was great in the sense that it demonstrated the idea that art can be can be as valuable to the experience of place as as parks, as roads, as anything else. But creative placemaking is as much about process as outcome. And so I'm just going to go quickly. There are 6 pillars that we use at the National Consortium for Creative Placemaking to determine what is good creative placemaking. The first, and I'm just going to go clockwise from the 12 o'clock position. First is quality of life. Are we enhancing, are we making places better to live and to experience for as many people as possible? Not just the people who enjoy art, but the people who are the the people who aren't gonna go to the spend $400 on theater tickets or spend $1,000 on paying. How is the work we do going to make their lives better? Economic opportunity, and here we follow the sustainable economic development model, as from Blakely's book. Um, Blakely and Green's book, Planning Local Economic Development. And here we look at how do we enhance standards of living for as many people as possible. Shared leadership. This is a challenge for us, for those of us who are trained in the prescriptive model of urban planning. The one that says that we basically are there to manage, to essentially control. The shared leadership is the idea that nobody knows everything, everybody knows something, everybody should contribute. Nobody can do everything, everybody can do something. Freedom and belonging is that sense that that it is important that everybody feels valued in the community. When we say public art, it doesn't mean public for everybody. There are people who are marginalized in our communities, people who live in the shadows. I'm not just talking about undocumented immigrants. I'm talking about homeless. I'm talking about people who, homeless people who may be suffering from severe drug addictions, mental health problems, etc. In some communities, and it might be people who don't have college, people of a distinct minority, or people who don't have college educations and don't feel that they are welcome in these public places. And so it is important that art and cultural activities are done in a way that values them, that makes them feel welcome. An asset-based orientation, for those of you who are familiar with asset-based community development model from Kretzmann and McKnight, is the idea that we look at what we have and build on and what's there. Now that seems obvious, but I'm going to say a few words here. Most of us have learned about arts, besides City Beautiful, is the creative class model of Richard Florida. The creative placemaking is, as it's practiced and as we believe it to be done well, is a response to the creative class model. That creative class model, it has been interpreted to mean that we have to import a lot of quote unquote cool kids, that we don't have enough creatives, as a noun, in this community, and so we have to bring in we have to bring in people to make things happen. Now, certainly you want to, certainly you want to attract people. Certainly you want to attract, dollars into your community. But there's creativity in every community, and it often goes untapped, unsurfaced. And so when we have an asset-based orientation, it says that we first must look at what's there before we look at what else is out in the world. And a place-based orientation is understanding the place, what are the distinct and best qualities of the place. And here, I'm talking about doing more than just our typical demographic analysis that we do from ACS or the Census Bureau, or just doing the 1 or 2 page histories that we read in some local history book. This is about understanding what makes this place the place that it is today. What makes it different from the place next door? Okay, so let's get into talking about City Beautiful. Let's get into kind of the traditional models of arts. How we do this as planners. Well, we tend to focus on centers, and that's great. I mean, it makes sense. We certainly don't want to encourage sprawl, but the what that does is this practice of focusing on centers and districts sort of encourages us to think in this very narrow way, and to really sort of concentrate so much in a small area. So, I mean, we are kind of, we're kind of thinking almost like a Newtonian universe where there are certain centers of gravity, and we build up those centers of gravity so that we can have a solar system surrounding it. You do something big in one place, and then a bunch of good things happen. Now, we can certainly look at data that shows that if you build a theater, you build a major museum, etc., you make it bigger, you do have some impact, certainly within the same block, maybe as much as another block away. But in terms of having that citywide impact, in terms of having a larger scale impact, it doesn't happen often as much as we would like it to. And I'll explain why. First, I want to talk about what is good about institutions and districts. Now, first, it's something intuitive. We like to think in terms of pyramids and targets with something at the center. It's just how we as humans think. So it also does make it easier for governing bodies to work with. I mean, it's certainly easier to work with 1 or 2 large institutions than 20 or 30 smaller ones who each are, in some way are competing with one another. We know that bigger institutions tend to have more space to do things, and that's of course valuable. And we often think about anchors, and they do serve as anchors. Now, how big the area that they anchor is, well, that's a big question. And I've mentioned the space, but more capacity, I should say, is about more institutional capacity. They often have staff who can do a lot more things. Now, a district, why do we do districts? Well, it's important to have places that people can go to that can serve as centers, that are starting points. You're not going to get many visitors coming back if they don't really know where anything is, and so having that starting point is important. Also, in terms of concentrating creative industries, concentrating creative professionals, every business needs to be close to its resources. the raw material, the resources for creative work is often ideas, is often often come from the exchanges with other people. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, I definitely recommend reading The Artistic Dividend by Anne Markison, where she talks about the different ways that creative professionals bring value to regional economies. Districts are just easier to manage. If you're going to close a street, you can design that street so that it could be closed. You don't have to keep going back to different streets and seeing, does this work? Does this not work? Also, what districts do is they can serve as pilot projects. I mean, in the best cases, you have a district that works really well, and people say, "Hey, let's have more of that in this community or the community next door." Now let's talk about some of the negative aspects of institutions. The thing is, we tend to think of these institutions, and here you see Lincoln Center in the heart of New York City, Midtown Manhattan. We tend to think of these major, big, wealthy organizations, and yes, they can generate millions of dollars, but not in net revenue. In fact, institutions, I don't know of any cultural institution that is able to survive simply on its ticket sales. Usually they take, they live on partially on ticket sales, as well as private grants, and as well as money from governing bodies. Often, I mean, they are nonprofit. Everyone that I know of is a nonprofit. Some of them are on municipally owned property, so they're not even paying property taxes. Now, to be fair, there are some that may be paying what we call in Jersey pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, but it's never the same as if they were a commercial entity paying full market rate on their taxes. Now, the other thing is, you'll see in this last bullet point, gentrification benefits institutions. And you might think, Leo, are you saying that institutions are trying to gentrify? No, absolutely not. I'm not saying that they have an intent to gentrify, but if you're running a place like Lincoln Center or a museum or opera company, something like where you're depending on your ticket sales from really wealthy people, then you are better off if the area around you is gentrified. That just makes sense. Not that you mean to do it, but you are better off. And so if your primary job as the executive director or the president of that theater, that museum, is to make sure that the lights stay on, to make sure you make payroll, the incentive is to bring wealthier people into your community, and it can create a certain level of conflict. Now, that being said, the people that we work with who are into creative placemaking, they are really disturbed by the experience of arts facilitating gentrification. Now, arts doesn't cause gentrification, but successful art activity can facilitate it, just like having good schools facilitates gentrifications, lowering crime, having more stores, having better roads, anything that improves the quality of life in a community can help facilitate gentrification. So this is something that I can tell you that the people that we work with do struggle with. So now he's saying, where are you getting this, Leo? Well, take a look at these numbers here. This is from a group called Helicon Collaborative. They did some research a couple of years ago about arts funding. You can see here that the arts world is a place where the rich get richer. Largest 2% of arts organizations, the ones that with budgets of $5 million and over, at 58% of all the money that's spent on arts. The smallest 90%, $1 million budget. And $1 million budget is still a pretty big budget for a nonprofit organization. They only get 21%. The arts world is biased towards urban and higher income. You can see that organizations that primarily serve rural and low-income Americans only get 4% of monies. And similarly, only 4% of monies go to organizations that serve people of color. So when you're thinking about that, when you're looking at the cultural institution, they may be wonderful people. They may be, and it may be a great thing to have an anchor. But just remember that if you're working to support a large cultural institution, you're making it that much harder for all the smaller organizations in the community. Now let's talk about the issues with districts. Similarly with cultural institutions, they draw time, money, and energy. Districts have in the world we live in today, where everything has to be programmed. In fact, I concerned that we, as in the planning design fields, tend to over-program spaces. What we have are districts that have managers, have boards, and again, the manager's job is to make payroll, make sure everything gets done. So they draw time, energy, and money from other places in other spaces, other places in the community. That concentration can lead to, again, gentrification. And I want to tell you a quick little story, something that really I found very disturbing. A couple of years ago, I was attending a presentation by Richard Florida, and I asked him, I said, how do we ensure, he was talking about why it's so important to do cultural districts, the creative class, and having places that we can live and play, and that we can really enjoy. And I said, how do we ensure that the benefits of cultural districts accrue outside of those districts? How do we make sure that the districts are not just silos, and becomes kind of an elitist neighborhood? Richard's answer was, I don't know. Now, this wasn't in 2002 when he just wrote his book. This was probably around 2012. Somebody should know that. That was it really disturbed me to hear that from him. I hope today that he does have some answers. But if he doesn't, this is what we're about. This is what creative placemaking is, to help answer those questions of, okay, how do we make sure that more of the benefits accrue to people, not just in in a district, but outside of it. What you're looking at here down on the left is Asbury Park, probably the coolest town in New Jersey. Yes, it is the Asbury Park of Bruce Springsteen, and Springsteen still hangs out on the boardwalk, which is kind of really cool. But it's if you do go down to, especially this time of year when it's getting warmer, just to let you know, if you do go down to the boardwalk and see Bruce, the rule is you got to be cool. It's kind of like with the manatees in Florida. If they approach you, you can interact with them. If not, you just leave them alone. So the thing about Asbury Park, besides the boardwalk, they have the street Cookman Avenue, which is their cultural district, and it is just wonderful. It's got stores, and it's got like all these music shops and Madame Marie's, and if and if you're a Springsteen fan, you know what that reference is about. And, it is so much fun, and it is so successful that the city will charge you more than $1 an hour to park there in the winter, when nobody used to go to Asbury Park, when most people don't go down to the shore. down the shore, I should say. Um, but here's a place where for a long time, it's been concentrated. And what you're seeing on the right is really just across Main Street, a literal Main Street from uh, Cookman Avenue, and it's a different situation. And what's happened in Asbury Park is, for a long time, you've had a tale of two cities. On Cookman Avenue and on the water side, it's young, white, wealthy, and in on the other side, poor, working class, more black and brown. And what we see is that's not unusual, okay, in a lot of places. All right, every community has something like that. But what happened in Jersey, in Asbury Park, is that the you hardly ever see, or for a long time you hardly ever saw people, African Americans, dark skinned Latinos, from the west side of Asbury Park on the east side. And so it really did become a tale of two cities. Now there's a good, hopefully there's a new chapter, and hopefully it'll lead to a good ending. There's work now in Asbury Park, which I hope the next time I do this I can share some photos of it. That their civic leaders there recognize this divide and are doing putting a new theater in and doing a lot of community-based artwork in the west side of Asbury Park. So, what this tells us is that when we look at districts, is the success of a district, we should not measure simply by its property values, by the number of people who go to the district, by the visitors it has, but what kind of impact it's having outside of the district. Okay, so now what can be done about this? What can we do? Well, now let's talk as planners, as designers. So for institutions, how do we make sure that they are not isolated? Well, we can require zoning, that we can write zoning regulations that require these to have a good street wall, to be open to the public. What you see here on the right is New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark, and you see while the front is set back, you see that there's an active plaza now. I showed you a picture without many people on it now, but I can tell you that one of the things that NJPAC does is they do a lot of programming in their front space there. Now, an interesting story with NJPAC, it was built in the late 90s. Its first executive director was a guy named Larry Goldman, who'd run Carnegie Center in New York. And towards the left, which is not in this picture, but if you look towards the left side of the screen, there's an underground garage. And the board of directors at the time, in the mid 90s, said, you know what we should do for our patrons, who are mostly going to be coming out from outside of Newark, New Jersey, we should create a tunnel between the Military Park Garage and New Jersey Performing Arts Center. That way they don't have to, walk on the street to get to NJPAC. Larry said no. He fought them, because doing that would have perpetuated the idea, that the stereotype of Newark as a dangerous place. And so he said, no, we are going to have a great front entrance, and people who park in Military Park Garage are going to walk out on the streets of Newark to get into our doors. And NJPAC has become very successful. In fact, it's generated a lot of market rate housing. And one of the issues now, actually, in downtown Newark around NJPAC is gentrification. Um, this may be, the second point may be something that's probably more suited to, well, actually urban designers as well, but I am concerned, very concerned about the internalizing of so much retail. We see this in sports stadiums, and so I would recommend that you limit the accessory uses, the restaurants, the any kind of mercantile, and I'm just using an arbitrary figure to tell you the truth, 10% of leasable square footage. I would say that you encourage it to be off-site. You know, it could be on the same lot, but people still have to go outside to get there. I think it's important that that the experience of being in these kinds of places is not just indoors, but in the in the community itself. You can require prevent long or large blank walls unless you're doing murals, but typically, as I don't need to tell you about the importance of windows in encouraging street life. And if you're looking for a model for this, I would look at the zoning code for Times Square in New York, which requires buildings to have some kind of artistic element or lighting, special lighting, because of that, to preserve that element of place, that fun element of place. Now, that code was legally justified as a type of preservation. If you're looking at developing something new, you probably couldn't use that, but you can, if you have it in your plan that for vibrant artistic spaces, then you can probably, depending on what your state laws are, you can probably justify design codes that way. Public art is probably not all that surprising. And do not allow parking in between the street and the front doors. In NJPAC's case, they have the parking on the side, and you can have some handicap parking nearby. You can now the theaters and museums typically don't have a lot of. They typically want everybody to go in the same space, in the same front doors, because it helps control crowd movement and reduces, the likelihood of people getting in without tickets. But you can do, drop off, pick up, and maybe a few handicap spots near the front doors. So, and again, open space like you have in NJPAC is a great idea, because if all the experience is indoors, it perpetuates the idea that arts are for the elites. So what if you can't redesign or rezone? Let's take an example. So here is the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'm going to show this, where you see my cursor is the original building, built in the, I believe, the late 1800s, early 1900s. By the way, this during the City Beautiful period, this was a boom time for these large cultural institutions. As you can see from the left, it expanded. Now, one thing I'd like you to notice on either side here, and you can't see this side, but there really are no public entryways here. Now, it looks like there was a public entryway here now, but that has just, it's no longer meant to be a public. There are no signs. There's a door, but there is one entryway, and that is right over here. And in order to get there, typically, as you can see, you have to drive in. It's yes, you can walk, but it's the design encourages you to drive, to park, and then to walk across. As you can see, the artwork is right in the center. It's facing the cars. It's not facing the street. It's away from the street. So this is actually in Courier is it's a great museum, but this is sort of a classic design here, the classic kind of ivory tower museum design. Say we are set apart from the rest of the community, and I should also note that this is only about it's 0.6 of a mile from the center of downtown, so it's about a 12-minute walk to the city. I mean to the museum. Now this is as you can see, this is pretty much done. You you could write a new you can rezone the property, but it's not going to make much difference. They're not, they'll just be grandfathered in with what they have. It doesn't look like, unless they want to expand, it doesn't look like it's an area that, it doesn't look like they're leaving much land for expansion anyway. So what do you do about places like that where you're maybe not redesigning, you're not rezoning? Well, think about temporary projects that change the space. So here on the left is in Eugene, Oregon. This is an example of, I'm sure you know it, tactical urbanism, which is the temporary reclaiming of space, or the changing a space from one type of use to another. In this case, just taking a parking lot and turning it into a small park. And you can do that. You see trash cans with flowers and movable chairs. This looks like it was some sod that was put in. These small trees that you can get from a hardware store. And in fact, Home Depot has a program where they will give a $5,000 credit to nonprofit organizations to do this kind of work. So that's the Home Depot Foundation. I'm sure Lowe's has something similar, but you can even go to a local hardware store and see what they'll donate. You may have seen some tactical urbanist projects, and you may have been involved with them, where you build your own furniture, Adirondack chairs, tables, shelves, etc. There's an outstanding site called Wikiblocks, WIKIBLOCKS, and I don't know if it's wikiblocks.org or wikiblocks.com, but it has patterns for building street furniture. And if you have an industrial router, or you know somebody who has an industrial router, then, or laser cutter, then you can make some really wonderful furniture. On the right is something that actually happened around the Courier Museum of Art. This was something called the Blue Trees Project, where they brought an artist, and I apologize, I'm blanking on the name of the artist, to paint trees blue in and around the Courier Museum and towards the downtown. A local ballet company did a performance there. Now, the idea of the blue trees, it came from Lynn Thompson, who is a graduate of our certificate program, which we do with the New Hampshire Institute of Art there in Manchester, and this was part of her capstone. The idea there was she recognized through our program that the Courier, while it wanted to be engaged with the community, its design and its practices that reflected its design didn't really allow it to. They did the usual stuff of having kids programming and trying to do things that bring more of the community into the institution. But the key here is that if you want to connect with people, in a meaningful way, you have to go to where they are. And so the Blue Trees project served several purposes. One, it was to demonstrate about, encouraging the view that trees were beautiful in and of themselves, and people should really, by painting them blue, it made you look at them more. It also said, because it was a Courier project, it also showed, hey, Courier was doing something outside of its doors. It was trying to reconnect with the community. So I hope to hear a lot more good things about the Courier Museum. I don't know that there's much you can do about the design of it right now, but certainly, hopefully there's more programming that goes out into the community. Now let's talk about districts. When I say design permeable edges, what does that mean? Well, we're used to the idea of districts having hard edges, and it could be walls, could be where we have, let's say, we do our murals in the arts district. So you're in the arts district when you see murals. You change the sidewalk texture, the lighting patterns for the district. Those are normal things. By having permeable edges, there's ways you can do it. Allow public art to go outside the district. Allow the art to lead people into the district. Maybe extend the sidewalk patterns out into the areas. Now, there's one exception I would say to this. It is where your arts district or cultural district is abutting a quiet residential district. In that case, you probably want to protect the residential area from too many visitors. So maybe having all those hard edges is valuable there. But if we're talking about an arts district that is within a larger commercial district, then there's probably not a real need to do that. And then what happens is that if you want to expand the district, it becomes easier because some of the design elements are there. Creating nodes at intersections, painting crosswalks. In Portland, they took the intersection of a crosswalk and they painted the whole thing. That's a very low cost way to do it. Now, you may say, oh, that sounds easy. It actually isn't. And because unfortunately there are too many traffic engineers, police chiefs who just are so worried that anything other than the standard white ladder on crosswalks will somehow cause people to go nuts and slam into each other. There's not much research that has been done, but from what I understand from my friends over at Transportation for America, that it's had no effect on traffic safety. It turns out that people are smart enough to see that they're smart enough to know to slow down to an intersection. And in fact, when they see something different than the usual crosswalk, it actually makes them slow down a little bit. Flexible streets. Let's pick some streets for for events, and let's make them slower streets. Let's maybe use warn-offs or chicanes to bump outs to slow down traffic. In fact, I'm very much in favor of taking a wide side street and turning it into a kind of a curvy, an S-curve street with using bump outs. Make kind of like a Frederick Law Olmsted sort of design, and you could change the street rather than just the standard asphalt is to do something artistic. Now, having said that, do not do what they did in Las Cruces, New Mexico, where they took a pedestrian street and did this wonderful art project, with these tiles. But the problem is it is so delicate that you can't drive anything on it, and It's just it makes it hard to use that space for as a space for events. So make sure it's it should be beautiful, but it also should be rugged as well. Using a lot of public art that's landmark that helps for navigation. There's no such thing as too much public art. If people don't like it, it will go away over time. But so don't worry if it's not pretty, if it's not beautiful. It's what, put it out there. People will tell you if it works, it doesn't work. And the great thing is, whatever you install, if it's that bad, you can move it someplace else. So the next 2 points might be a little bit odd for us. Well, one you probably know about form-based codes, but why should we minimize contextual zoning? Here, this is where I'm going to share my concern about us over-programming spaces. I've seen design guidelines that are so prescriptive. For example, I think it was New York. There's one design guideline that is for one district that requires Juliet balconies. Now, is there anything related to? Now, is there anything critical in the health, safety, or welfare of a community that a Juliet balcony addresses? Probably not. And if we want to inspire creativity, we need to give people the flexibility to be creative. It's not so. As designers, we need to step back and be less prescriptive and more adaptive. Yes, we want to protect public health, safety, and welfare. Yes, there should be some minimum standards, but let the design grow organically. It is the only way to be authentic. So this is something that is going to be tough for some of us to swallow, to be truthful, but I think it's important for this kind of work. Form-based codes, again, it's about being less prescriptive. Asbury Park is the Cookman Avenue has a very dense development. They have a glass blowing center there where people can do glass blowing. Now, I wouldn't think that glass blowing would be something that would be safe in a dense area, but if your building codes require a strong enough firewall and ventilation, I think you can do it. Our model, we have to get away from that model where if something is not specifically allowed, then it is implicitly prohibited. I think we need to do the reverse. There are certain things we certainly don't want to have heavy industry next to residential, of course, for safety, pollution reasons. But I think we have to be open to a lot of uses that we don't anticipate, and as long as they can meet some basic safety requirements, I think they should be okay. Artways is a term that I've started to use. It's basically trailblazing, path building, using public artwork to, it could be iconic, could be lovable objects, but the idea is that the art is leading people to or from districts. Okay, now, I forgot to mention this before, but because I want to thank you all for being part of this program, and so as a token of my appreciation, I'm extending an offer that I made to all urban design preservation division members, to all of you as well. If you go to our Pacific Creative Placemaking Leadership Summit, June 20th to 22nd in Los Angeles, you can use discount code APA25 to get 25% off all tickets. And Margaret, I don't know if you'll be there, but I hope there'll be some other members of the Design Preservation Division that will be there. So I think this might be a good time for for me to stop and to take your questions or get your comments. Or maybe, if you want to throw a brick at me for saying that we're too prescriptive, that's okay too. So,
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Folks, feel free to type those questions in, and we'll see how many we can get through. The first question, in the communities that allow tactical urbanism, are they breaking any zoning ordinances? Do they have to apply for any type of approval or permits?
Depends. Um, Technical urbanism, because it always involves, uh, almost always involves the right of way. Um, it's not so much. It's often not so much a. Well, let's see. Is it a zoning issue? Well, it's temporary use, so it depends on whether your zoning affects that. But typically, it's more kind of like code enforcement issue, especially if it's something on the street, like let's say you're you're taking a lane and you're making a bicycle lane out of it, or you're taking a parking space and making it into a parklet. Um, then usually it's your local traffic, your Department of Engineering that has to deal with it. Um, the Technical urbanism now is at a stage where there's a lot of people, including elected officials, who like it. Uh, the challenge can be, depending on the project, it is the property owners where it's affected. So, for example, a parklet, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is an extension of the sidewalk into, usually by claiming a parking space for a period of time. There are some there are some property owners who say, wow, this is great. This is going to get more people in front of my store, my building. I love it. And there's others who say, oh my God, I can't stand it. It's going to take away a parking space and, the whole world's going to fall apart. You can see where I stand on this. So um, I would recommend that before undertaking any kind of tactical urbanism project to meet with your municipal manager, to meet with police, the local engineer. There are, of course, and I can't recommend this in every situation, but there's, of course, guerrilla urbanism, where you go and you do something and the powers that be get upset, but the public loves it, and to the point where the powers that be say, oh, this is terrific. And if you read the book Tactical Urbanism by Garcia and Leiden, you see some examples that are just that projects that were that elected and municipal officials said, oh my God, how could this happen? And then they said, oh, well, we want more of it. So I'm actually not seeing the questions, Christine. Am I supposed to be seeing the questions?
No,
Or,
you do not see the questions. I'm the only one that sees them.
oh, okay.
Next question. We got to talk about these painted trees because I'm getting a lot of questions about it. You're going to have to tell us how that impacts the health of the tree, how long they stay painted, if they run, does it, all of a sudden the ground below it or the concrete below it turn blue? You're going to have to go into detail. A lot of questions about the trees.
Okay, well, I can tell you, I can tell you that the paint is non-toxic, and actually, farmers have been painting trees not for artistic purposes, but uh, farmers of some orchards in, I believe, in New England, would paint young trees with non-toxic paint as a way to protect them in the winter, particularly against pests. So it doesn't harm the trees. This particular artist, it's a Greek name, and I think it's Demetros. I think something like that. What you do is just Google blue trees and Manchester, New Hampshire. He does this all over the world. Um, I honestly don't know whether it bleeds out into the concrete. Um, my guess is that it doesn't. None of the pictures that I've seen show it having an impact on the ground at all. And I suspect this may be because of the way they're painted. That they're not spray painted. It's brushes. Um, I've never actually seen the painting of the trees themselves, but I know it doesn't harm the trees at all. How long it stays, again, I I don't I'm not sure. I would also refer you to Lynn Thompson over at the Currier Museum of Art to find out about her experience with the blue trees, and she could probably answer those questions. I'm sure she got them herself.
Thank you. Okay.
Is anybody asking? Is anybody asking where you can only paint them blue, or?
No,
No?
I just thought that was, their favorite color. I assumed. No.
Yeah, I like, but I was thinking, hey, I'd like sort of like a rainbow palette of a palette of trees. I think that would be cool. But I guess this guy Dimitros, if that's his name, I think he only works in blue for some reason.
All right. Next question. My city is in the process of creating a cultural district, and the historic site that I work at is one of the partner institutions. There is no clear leader on this effort. Who typically leads something like this? Is it the city? Is it a partnership? What are your thoughts?
It should be a partnership. Um, and there should be an MOA. I think, I think if there's an institution and the city, that there should be an MOA, and that there should be uh, uh, a clear governing body, a steering committee that should be formed. There should be somebody who is selected by both participants as a manager of the program. Um, but it also an important part of this work is that you should think about the team, the people involved. Think about it not as a circle, but as a spiral. That you should always be trying to get more and more partners. Now, some people get really bothered by that because they think, the whole idea of, oh, there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and if you have too many people, nothing gets done. What you do is you establish a set of, you establish some guidelines for what does it mean to be a partner, what kind of responsibilities, what's what kind of authority does a partner have? Whether do they get to advise, do they get to choose, what do they choose about? And so in essence, uh, it is a contract. It doesn't have to be written as a contract, but it's a set of culture of accountability. With this work, the more people you can get involved earlier on, the more sustainable your results will be, the more ideas you'll have. Because the thing we have to understand is that in this work, we don't come up with all the ideas. We create the environment, the climate that inspires creativity. And then we facilitate those works that can have the biggest and best impacts uh, towards towards our goals. Um, so uh, when you write the MOA or the MOU, depending on what you want to call it, write it in such a way that it's clear that other entities can join in the partnership, so that it's not controlled. Even if it's a partnership between just the city and the cultural institution, that's not enough. That's not a real meaningful community partnership. You want to have it going across not only different arts organizations, but also different types of organizations in the study area.
Okay, thank you. Next, all right, we got to talk about some of this public art and censorship, or perhaps lack of censorship from whatever entity is hiring the artist, whether it be, you know, a community or a commission. There have been a couple questions. Twice the Heidelberg project came up as this was a great idea at first, and now it's morphed into this sort of incredible show. So if you Google Heidelberg project in Detroit, you can see how that works. And actually, in addition to that, here in Northeast Ohio, Cleveland State University has they commissioned a public artist years ago, and apparently it's an ever evolving piece. And the artist recently added some text that is inappropriate, frankly. And he's now suing Cleveland State because they're trying, you know, they tried to cover it up. They tried to tell him to, you have to take this down. And he said, no way, you hired me to do this. It's an ever evolving piece. This is how it's going to go. And it's incredibly inappropriate. Google Billy Lawless, Cleveland State, and the piece will pop up. Anyway, the point is, how do we juggle this piece of public art and the artist's needs and the community's needs and, you know, the future of a piece? Does a community need to get legal involved? Should there be a commission that approves the artwork? What are your thoughts on all of this?
Sure. Well, what I would say is that one of the things about committees and commissions and boards and stuff, the main criticism is that they get rid of the very worst, but they also get rid of the very best. So you get something sort of in the middle. And one of the things about doing public art where you're involving the community members from the beginning is that they set the standards. They tell you they're not creating the public art themselves, but they're setting the guidelines for what it should say, what it should show. And typically what people like to see in public art is themselves, or a better version of themselves, or their aspirations. So, I don't know of any public artwork that was designed with community members where you see a lot of obscene language or nudity or things that offend a lot of people. Now, some people just get offended because they don't like they think it doesn't look pretty, and art doesn't have to look pretty. Some people do get offended if they see people who look different, who on the wall look different than what they think should be looking like in the community. The reason I say this is there was one town in central Jersey where they commissioned an artwork. This is a town that is dealing with some big racial tensions between older white residents and newer Latino mostly immigrants. The artwork, the person who is featured in the artwork was a person of color, and some people got upset about it. So I would say the engaging the community has a moderating influence. Now, there are some artists who get really upset by that. They think of what happens, what they see. One artist told me the other day, "Oh, I'm sick of this pablum." That was the exact word. "I'm sick of this pablum." You know what? This is not about the art. This is not about the artist. This is about the community. And if people who have to look at this thing, who have to live with this thing every day, if if an artist doesn't like it, well, the artist can go work on some private property and make that happen. So that's for in general. Now, on public properties, owned by the municipality, owned by the state, or a public institution, certainly the government agency has the right to select its own artists. I do recommend involving the community in any way, but you can certainly be when it's property that your government owns. They have more leeway in terms of directing the content of the artwork. Now, when it's private property, I say again, you gotta be really careful. The First Amendment prevents governments from determining the content on of private speech. And the thing is, it's not all going to be pretty. It's not all going to be beautiful. It's not all going to be nice. It's not all going to be comfortable. And we have to live with that. That's about being adaptive. It's about being inclusive. The best we can do is create an environment that allows for more creative expression, and then have more of that happen. Once we start to say, hey, this is allowed, this is not allowed, other than on municipal property, then that sends the message to artists and to other people who want to express themselves. You are welcome, or you're not welcome, and that violates our guidelines of trying to be inclusive. When you have community boards, sometimes there's juries. I would encourage you to have a jury that's made up of definitely have artists, professional artists there, but also have people who enjoy the arts but are not professional artists, because you need artists who understand that it's public art is not just about the art, it's about the public as well. Did I answer all? I think that was a multi-part question. Did I answer all of those?
I was kind of going on and on. My question, I kept adding things to it.
Oh, okay.
I think it sounds. Yes, that sounds good. Thank you. The next question: what are some good examples of historic districts successfully incorporating creative placemaking?
Of historic districts that successfully incorporate creative placemaking. Well, I always turn to the Valley Arts District in Orange, New Jersey. And that is, it's not a designated historic district, but it's historic in the sense of the Valley District was the hat making capital of the US in the early 1900s. And that's an area where they've been successful. It's still a work in progress, but they've been successful in terms of creating creating permanently affordable work and live spaces for artists. I want to say on another scale, let's see, in other communities, I do like the Stone Street area of Manhattan, where they've used tactical urbanism, and that's in New York City. To think, historic districts that have successfully incorporated creative placemaking. This is one of those questions where it's on the tip of my tongue. That I could see it. I can visualize these places, but for some reason I'm having trouble identifying them. But what I would recommend, rather than have all of you wait for me to to get the neurons firing correctly, is to go to Art Place America and look at their case studies. And there should be some about historic districts and where they've used creative placemaking. It's happened in many places. That's just, for some reason, I'm having trouble really pinpointing a great example. If any of you on the call now can identify any that you think are good, please share them.
Trinidad, Colorado has great historic downtown that incorporates
Oh,
affordable
yes.
housing for artists. That's
Yes,
interesting.
Trinidad's done some great work there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Salida as well in Colorado. Actually, it's funny. It was Santa Fe, the northern New Mexico. Santa Fe, New Mexico is a prototype. Now, there's a lot of issues there with gentrification, but in terms of engaging local history, and not just white American history, but Native American, uh, Spanish American history, and incorporating that with arts. Santa Fe a is an international example and a very successful one. Another one I can say, Asheville, North Carolina, that built on its heritage. Oh, here's a really interesting one. Holland, Michigan. Holland, Michigan had a lot of Dutch immigration back in the 19th century, and as part of its revitalization strategy, really took on, the idea of being a Dutch community in America. And now they have a tulip festival, they have windmills, they have some of the stuff. It's a little too, but the idea of they're using art and connecting with their history is valuable. So thank you for that trigger there with Trinidad.
Wonderful.
Santa Fe, New Mexico, Asheville, North Carolina, Holland, Michigan are three that I would really look at.
Just a couple more, just because they're coming in. Quebec City's Old Port District has wonderful tactical
Nice.
urbanism program during the summer. Smoky Hollow, Tallahassee,
Mm.
Princeton, New Jersey. So
Oh,
these are a lot of
Princeton.
places that you can take a look at. Um, Next question. This is interesting. I was recently in Philadelphia and learned about the 1% for art program, which is 1% of a project's development cost over a certain amount is given to an art fund.
Hmm.
Um, is this the best way to fund public art? How can a city implement something similar? How can local planners begin the discussion, and with who? Um, the person asking the question says, right now we don't have anything in our city budget, and unfortunately murals are deemed signs and are approved by the BZA as a variance.
Yeah.
Not the right people for approving art. So
No.
I guess to summarize, what's the best way to kick off an art fund for community?
Sure. So there's a few ways. Now, the 1% is great when you're in an area where you have a lot of new construction, because if you don't have a whole lot of new construction, you're not going to have much money. The 1% programs are very common around the United States. Typically, the programs focus on 1% of construction budget on public projects. So, something that a municipality or transit agency does. Now, there are very few examples of percentage for art programs on private development, but I can tell you that there's one in New Jersey, in Morristown. The Speedwell Avenue redevelopment plan requires private developers to dedicate 1% up to $100,000 in public art, which they can do either on site or that they can contribute to a fund that's managed by the county arts agency. Um, the so and you know, the projects, this is, Morristown is an area where there has been a lot of new construction recently, and so the fund is growing. Hoboken, New Jersey is the mayor there has you know, is doing 1% of the bond ordinance. Anything that's bonded um, is required for public art. So um, other ways that I would recommend is putting it into redevelopment plans. Now, this of course depends on what state you're in and what your state's, uh, you know, what your, you know, the state authorizes you to do. Um, but I did a redevelopment plan recently in the South Ward of Newark, New Jersey, where and I did this with another firm, not just ourselves, but we required a menu of we did a menu of options, and developers had to take three things from the menu. You know, it could be public art, it could be green roofs, you know, something. So it was something either arts, environmental related, or both. You know, or expanded public space. Um, for small projects, now those are for you know, larger projects. For smaller projects, you could certainly look to there. In many communities, there are community foundations that support arts and economic and social and community development. Banks will help support this work, and you know, if it's small grants of a few $1,000s here. Um, if you're in a larger city, I think one of my favorite programs is I believe it's in Milwaukee, where there's a percentage for art program where public art is defined not just as visual art like statues and murals, but also performances, also temporary art. And that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the program allows for neighborhoods to pursue grants from the city through this fund to create art projects. Finally, what I would also recommend is there's a crowdfunding platform that's designed specifically for place-based projects. It's called IOBY for In Our Backyard. I believe it's ioby.org. And this could be in an area where, let's say you have, you know, middle class, upper middle class area, or where you have, you know, large religious congregations, because there's a pattern of giving, of support, community support there. That crowdfunding pattern can work. The second part of the statement regarding art being regulated as signs, that's something that needs to be addressed, because what that does is that's the kind of thing that creates an environment, or perpetuates an environment that says that creative expression is not really welcome. So what I would do is prepare an ordinance that allows for the permitting of murals, and has, let's say, either an arts council or some kind of committee made up of artists and other residents to review the proposed murals for really not to uh, direct content, but to ensure that it's not inappropriate. The role of the planner could be to make sure that the artwork itself is done in such a way that it's not interfering with public right-of-way, that working with, let's say, the building code, your building code code enforcement officer, your buildings people, to make sure that the whatever is being constructed is going to withstand weather conditions. So I would do that, and someplace you could look at for inspiration there is Perth Amboy, New Jersey, which had the same issues of murals being illegal, no murals, and then they in 2014 they wrote an ordinance that allowed permitting of murals. What I would also say, and I'll just, I know there's other questions for sake of time, is some municipalities may want to regulate murals on near or on commercial properties as signs, which gives them more freedom over the content. I would say, to the extent you can, try to encourage your municipality to change that so that only signs are treated as signs, that murals are treated as a private expression. So that's I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's fine. I think actually we're going to go ahead and wrap up because it's just about 2:30 and I've been drilling you with questions for about a half hour. So thank you for sticking with me and not just hanging up the phone.
Yeah.
Leo, thanks for joining us today. It looks like Margaret jumped off, but thanks to the Urban Design and Preservation Division of APA for hosting today's webcast. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are recording this session. It will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. You'll just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast. We'll also have a PDF copy available for download on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Again, Leo, thank you so much for joining us. And hey, everyone, have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks everybody who's here. So,
Thank
bye, everybody.
you. Bye-bye.